On a quiet afternoon in Pleasant Grove, Utah, an emergency call came through that immediately unsettled the dispatcher. The caller sounded nervous, struggling to explain what he had just discovered. At first, nothing about the call seemed clear, but there was a sense of urgency in his voice that suggested something was seriously wrong. The man identified himself as Darren West. His voice trembled as he told dispatch he had found something inside his garage wrapped tightly in plastic and tape. When asked to clarify, he hesitated. Then he quietly said he believed the package contained a baby. Police arrived to find the garage door standing open. Darren waited outside, pale and visibly shaken, surrounded by family members who had come to help him move back in after his release from prison. Officers immediately sensed this was not an ordinary call. Inside the garage, boxes were stacked along every wall. Most appeared to be old storage, ordinary remnants of family life. But one box stood out. It was sealed far more carefully than the others, wrapped tightly with electrical tape, as if someone wanted to ensure it would never be opened. When officers opened the box, a powerful odor filled the air. Inside were the decomposed remains of an infant. The garage fell silent. In that moment, everyone understood this discovery was far more serious than anyone had expected. As investigators looked around the garage, a chilling realization set in. There were hundreds of boxes stacked along the walls. If one contains something so horrifying, what might be hidden inside the others? And as police prepared to search every box, one question became unavoidable. Who had placed them there? With the garage secured and the discovery documented, investigators turned their focus to one critical question. Darren West insisted he had no idea how the baby ended up there. That left only one person who could explain what had happened: his wife, Megan Huntsman. At the time of the discovery, Megan was not at the house. She was living elsewhere, separated from Darren, and largely disconnected from the life he had just returned to. Darren told officers that he contacted Megan immediately after opening the box. According to him, her reaction was not one of shock. Instead, she told him it was a miscarriage from years earlier. She claimed she had panicked, didn't know what to do, and made a terrible decision in the moment. To investigators, this explanation raised immediate concerns. In Utah, stillbirths and miscarriages are not crimes. Medical help can be sought without fear of prosecution, so investigators asked themselves a critical question. If the baby had truly been stillborn, why hide the body at all? And why keep it concealed for years inside a garage? Detectives contacted Megan and asked her to come in for questioning. The request was framed carefully, presented as an opportunity to clarify what had happened and rule out any misunderstanding. Megan agreed and was transported to the police station later that day. Inside the interrogation room, Megan appeared nervous but cooperative. She repeated the same story Darren had shared. She said she had been heavily using drugs at the time, alone, overwhelmed, and afraid. She insisted the baby had never been alive and described the event as a tragic mistake rather than a crime. But as the interview continued, detectives noticed inconsistencies. Megan struggled with timelines. Her details shifted slightly with each retelling, and most concerning of all, she repeatedly asked whether she was going to jail. For someone claiming a stillbirth, her fear of punishment seemed out of place. As detectives weighed Megan's words, officers back at the house continued their search, and within the stacks of boxes in that garage, they were about to uncover something that would completely unravel her story. Because the first box was not the only one. While detectives continued questioning Megan at the station, officers at the Pleasant Grove house pressed forward with their search. The garage was now treated as a full crime scene. Every box was photographed, numbered, and carefully moved. What had initially seemed like ordinary household storage now carried a heavy sense of dread. As officers worked through the stacks, they noticed another box that closely resembled the first. It was sealed with layers of tape and positioned in a way that suggested it had been deliberately hidden. The similarities were impossible to ignore. When officers opened the second box, the smell confirmed their fears before they could even look inside. Wrapped in plastic and padding was another infant. The discovery removed any remaining doubt. This was not an isolated incident. Something far more disturbing had been happening inside this home. Investigators immediately notified the detective interviewing Megan. The tone of the questioning changed. This was no longer about a single tragedy from years earlier. There was now clear evidence of a repeated pattern. When confronted with the discovery of a second baby, Megan's composure broke. She admitted there were more. She struggled to say how many, explaining that years of drug use had blurred her memory. What she could say with certainty was that the boxes in the garage were not empty. Megan described giving birth alone, often without medical help, terrified of being discovered. She claimed she panicked every time, making decisions driven by fear rather than reason. But as she spoke, detectives began to hear something troubling in her language. Small shifts that suggested not every baby had been stillborn. As investigators processed what Megan was saying, officers at the house continued opening boxes. With each one, the possibility grew more frightening. This was no longer about how many boxes were in the garage, but how many lives had been hidden inside them. And as the search continued, Megan was about to say something that would change the case forever. As the search inside the garage continued, detectives shifted their focus back to Megan's statements. Her earlier explanation of repeated stillbirths no longer aligned with what officers were finding. The pattern was too deliberate, too consistent. Investigators knew they needed to ask more direct questions. Detectives asked Megan to walk them through one of the births in detail. She described being alone in the house, overwhelmed by pain and fear. She said the baby came suddenly, without warning, and that she didn't know what to do. Her words were careful, almost rehearsed. Then detectives asked a simple but critical question. Did the baby show any signs of life? Megan paused. Her answer was uncertain. She said she thought one of them might have been alive briefly. That hesitation marked a turning point in the investigation. Pressed further, Megan admitted that not all of the babies were stillborn. Some, she said, were alive for a short time. She explained her actions as panic-driven, claiming she was overwhelmed by addiction and fear of being discovered. But the admission changed everything. At the same time, officers at the house reported finding additional boxes. Each discovery reinforced the same conclusion. This was not a single tragic mistake. It was a repeated decision made again and again over several years. When asked how many babies she believed were hidden in the garage, Megan struggled to answer. Her estimate was chilling. She said there could be 8, maybe 9. Even she wasn't sure anymore. With that statement, the investigation escalated dramatically. More officers were called in, and the search expanded beyond the garage. What had started with one box was now unfolding into something far larger and far more disturbing. And as the number continued to grow, investigators were forced to confront a question they never wanted to ask. How many babies were still waiting to be found? As the scope of the case widened, investigators turned their attention back to Darren West. Megan's statements raised an unavoidable question. How could someone live in the same house for years and not notice repeated pregnancies? Detectives knew they had to determine whether Darren was truly unaware or whether he had chosen not to see what was happening. Darren was brought in for questioning later that day. From the moment he sat down, his emotional state was clear. He appeared exhausted, overwhelmed, and confused. When detectives told him how many infants had been found in the garage, he struggled to process the information. Darren broke down as the details were explained. He insisted he had no knowledge of the babies in the garage. He said Megan had always been secretive about her body and claimed miscarriages when questioned. He admitted their lives had been chaotic, dominated by addiction and instability. Detectives challenged Darren directly. They asked, how could he have missed so many pregnancies over nearly a decade? Darren said he was often absent, either incarcerated or consumed by his own substance abuse. He claimed he trusted Megan's explanations and never imagined something so extreme. Despite their doubts, investigators found no physical evidence linking Darren to the crimes. None of his fingerprints appeared on the boxes, bags, or tape recovered from the garage. There was no proof he had handled or hidden the remains. Eventually, Darren requested a lawyer, bringing the interview to an end. With no evidence tying him directly to the deaths, detectives were forced to release him. Legally, he was free. Emotionally, he was shattered. As Darren walked out of the station, investigators shifted their focus back to the evidence, because while his role remained unclear, the forensic findings would soon reveal truths no one could deny. And when the forensic results came back, the case would take an even darker turn. With Darren released, investigators turned fully to the physical evidence recovered from the garage. Every box, bag, and layer of tape was carefully cataloged and sent for forensic examination. What Megan had said now needed to be verified by science, not words. Medical examiners worked under difficult conditions. The remains had been stored for years, wrapped tightly and hidden away. Despite the challenges, examiners were able to determine critical details about the births, details that would directly contradict Megan's early claims. Several of the infants showed clear signs of live birth. Air had entered their lungs. Their bodies told a story that could not be explained away as stillbirth. These findings confirmed what detectives had begun to suspect. Some of the babies had been alive after being born. DNA testing soon followed. The results confirmed that all of the babies were biologically related. Darren West was identified as the father in every case. There was no evidence of outside involvement. Megan had acted alone. The forensic timeline revealed a disturbing pattern. These events were not clustered together. They occurred over many years. Time had passed between each pregnancy, each birth, each decision. This was not a momentary lapse. It was repeated behavior. Psychological evaluations later pointed to long-term substance abuse and emotional detachment. But experts were clear: addiction did not remove responsibility. Megan knew what she was doing, and she knew the consequences. Fear may have driven her actions, but it did not excuse them. With the evidence complete, prosecutors moved quickly. Megan Huntsman would soon face a full weight of the justice system, and for the first time, the case shifted from investigation to accountability. But no sentence could ever measure the loss uncovered inside that garage. By early 2015, the investigation was complete. Prosecutors formally charged Megan Huntsman with multiple counts of murder. The evidence was overwhelming, and the case moved quickly toward court. What remained was not the question of guilt, but how justice would be delivered. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was quiet and tense. Megan Huntsman stood before the judge, appearing distant and withdrawn. There was no dramatic display of emotion. Instead, there was silence, broken only by the formal language of the court. Megan pleaded guilty. She did not challenge the forensic findings or the statements she had made during interrogation. By admitting responsibility, she spared the families a prolonged trial, but the admission did little to lessen the gravity of what had occurred. The judge acknowledged Megan's history of addiction and instability, but made one point clear: substance abuse did not excuse her actions. Each decision had been made deliberately, and each life lost carried its own weight. Megan Huntsman was sentenced to 6 consecutive terms of 5 years to life in prison. The structure of the sentence ensured she would never be released. There was no reaction, no visible relief, no resistance. The decision was final. Outside the courtroom, investigators reflected on the case. Many described it as the most emotionally exhausting experience of their careers. The number of victims, the length of time, and the secrecy involved left a lasting impact on everyone who worked the investigation. The legal case was over, but the story was far from finished, because even with a sentence handed down, one haunting question remained. How did something like this go unnoticed for so long? And in the final chapter, the focus turns to what this case reveals about the dangers of silence.
Years after the sentencing, the case of Megan Huntsman still lingers in the minds of those who encountered it, not because of how loud or chaotic it was, but because of how quiet it remained for so long. Nothing about the house appeared unusual. Nothing about the neighborhood raised alarms, and yet unimaginable acts had taken place just beyond plain sight. The garage, once filled with boxes, became a symbol of what the investigation revealed. A place meant for storage had been transformed into a hidden record of decisions made in isolation. Over time, the boxes blended into the background, unnoticed, unquestioned, and ignored. Neighbors later said there had been moments when something felt off. Occasional smells during the summer heat, a sense that something wasn't quite right. But explanations were easy to accept, and questions were easy to avoid. Normal life continued. For Darren West, the aftermath was permanent. He was cleared of involvement, but knowledge came with its own burden. He learned that children he never knew existed had lived and died without his awareness. No investigation could undo that reality. For investigators, the case became a reminder of how deeply secrecy and denial can shape tragedy. Addiction played a role, but silence allowed it to continue. The absence of intervention, questions, or attention created space for the unthinkable. This case is not just about one person or one family. It's about how easily warning signs can be overlooked when life appears ordinary on the surface, how discomfort leads to avoidance, and how silence, over time, can become dangerous. The most unsettling truth in this story is not where it happened, but how close it was to everyday life. The danger was never hidden in darkness. It was hidden in routine, in assumptions, in silence. Because sometimes the question isn't whether the signs were there, it's whether anyone chose to look.